Story 1. The Loop on Highway 50. Robert Hayes had been driving semi-trucks for 23 years, hauling freight across the American heartland without incident. He knew every rest stop between Kansas City and Denver, every way station, every diner that served decent coffee at 3 in the morning. But in October of 2022, Robert encountered something on Highway 50 in Nevada that made him question everything he thought he understood about the roads he traveled. It started normally enough. Robert had picked up a load of agricultural equipment in Sacramento, bound for a distribution center outside of Ely, Nevada. The manifest was straightforward, the weather was clear, and he'd made this run dozens of times before. Highway 50, known as the loneliest road in America, stretched across Nevada's basin and range country with nothing but sagebrush and mountains for company. Robert preferred it that way. The isolation meant fewer traffic problems, fewer idiots texting while driving, fewer complications. He departed Sacramento at 6 in the evening, planning to drive through the night and arrive by morning. The sun set behind him as he crossed into Nevada, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple that gradually faded to black. By 9 o'clock, Robert was deep into the empty stretch between Fallon and Austin, with his headlights carving a tunnel through the darkness and the white lines of the highway disappearing endlessly beneath his wheels. The CB radio crackled occasionally with distant chatter, truckers hundreds of miles away discussing routes and weather. His GPS showed him exactly where he was, the blue line of his route stretching ahead. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Then Robert passed mile marker 147. He noticed it particularly because he'd been watching for 150, where there was supposed to be a rest area where he could grab a quick break and check his straps. Mile marker 147 came and went, illuminated briefly in his headlights. Robert kept driving, watching the odometer, waiting for the rest area. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The GPS still showed him approaching mile marker 150, but he should have reached it by now. Then he saw mile marker 147 again. Robert blinked, certain he'd misread it. But no. There it was in his mirrors, the reflective numbers catching his taillights. 147. He checked his GPS again. It showed him at mile 149, almost to the rest area. But he'd just passed 147. Again. A cold sensation crawled up Robert's spine. He keyed his CB radio. Breaker 19, this is Silver Bullet eastbound on Highway 50. Anyone out there got ears on? Static answered him. He tried again. Any westbound traffic on Highway 50 between Fallon and Austin come back? Nothing. Not even the distant chatter from before. Just empty static, like the radio was working, but there was nobody left in the world to hear him. Robert drove faster, watching his speedometer climb from 65 to 70 to 75. He needed to get to that rest area, needed to stop and figure out what was happening. The highway stretched ahead, perfectly straight, perfectly empty. His headlights showed the same view they had for the past hour, endless asphalt and sagebrush, mountains dark against the starlit sky. Mile marker 147 appeared in his headlights. No, Robert said aloud. No, that's not possible. He'd been driving for at least 15 minutes since he'd last seen it. At 75 miles per hour, he should have covered nearly 20 miles. He should be well past Austin by now. But there it was, mile marker 147, and as it disappeared behind him, he knew with absolute certainty that he would see it again. He tried his cell phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual out here, but the screen showed something strange. The time read 9:23 p.m., the same time it had been when he first passed mile marker 147. Robert stared at the phone, watching the seconds tick by. But when he looked away and looked back, it still read 9:23 p.m. The GPS was no help. It continued to show him moving along Highway 50, the blue dot of his location creeping forward, but the mile markers didn't match. According to the GPS, he was at mile 162. According to the road, he was passing mile 147 for the third time. Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd heard stories, of course, every trucker had. Tales swapped at truck stops about roads that went nowhere, highways that looped back on themselves, stretches of asphalt that existed outside normal space. He'd always dismissed them as bullshit, the products of exhaustion and isolation and too much time alone. But this was happening. This was real. He tried slowing down, easing off the throttle and letting the truck decelerate to 50 miles per hour. Maybe speed was the problem. Maybe he was somehow driving too fast for reality to keep up. But slower didn't help. Mile marker 147 appeared again and again and again. He tried speeding up, pushing the truck to 80, the engine roaring, but nothing changed. The same mile marker, the same empty highway, the same dead radio and frozen clock. Robert pulled over. Just stopped the truck right there in the middle of the highway, set the brake, and sat in the darkness trying to think. There had to be an explanation. Had to be something he was missing. Maybe he'd fallen asleep without realizing it, and this was a dream. He pinched himself hard enough to leave a mark. Didn't wake up, still sitting in the cab, still on Highway 50, still trapped. He climbed out of the truck, his boots hitting the pavement. The night air was cold, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Above him, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to his predicament. The highway stretched in both directions, vanishing into darkness. No other traffic, no lights in the distance, nothing but him and the road and the terrible, crushing silence. Robert walked to the front of his truck, studying the road ahead. It looked normal. Just asphalt and painted lines. He walked back to the trailer, checked the cargo. Everything was secure. The equipment hadn't shifted. The straps were tight. He was fine. The truck was fine. Everything was fine except for the fact that he was caught in some kind of impossible loop, driving the same piece of highway over and over again. He got back in the cab and tried driving backward. Put the truck in reverse and started backing up down the highway, watching his mirrors. Maybe if he approached from the other direction, the loop would break. But after backing up for 10 minutes, covering what should have been several miles, he reached mile marker 147 coming from the opposite direction. The loop extended both ways. Hours passed. Robert kept driving, kept trying different things. He tried pulling off the highway onto the shoulder and following it. The shoulder just curved back to the highway. He tried turning off his headlights, driving by starlight alone. Didn't matter. He tried singing, talking to himself, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. The mile marker kept appearing. 147, 147, 147. His phone remained frozen at 9:23 p.m. The GPS continued showing him moving along a highway that apparently didn't exist. The CB radio hissed its empty static. Robert felt panic building in his chest, the kind of deep, primal fear that came from realizing the rules you'd lived by your entire life might not be as solid as you'd believed. Then something changed. On what must have been the 50th or 100th passage of mile marker 147, Robert saw something else. A figure standing on the shoulder of the road, illuminated briefly in his headlights. A woman in a white dress, her face pale, her eyes dark and bottomless. She didn't move as he passed, just stood there watching him. Robert's blood turned to ice. The next loop, she was closer to the highway. The loop after that, she was standing on the painted white line at the edge of the pavement. Each time he passed mile marker 147, she moved closer to the center of the road, and Robert realized with dawning horror that eventually she would be standing directly in his path. He tried to remember what he'd been thinking about when this started. Had he seen something? Done something? There must have been a trigger, a moment when reality had broken and trapped him here, but he couldn't remember anything unusual. Just driving. Just the empty highway and the stars and the endless white lines. The woman was now standing in his lane. Robert gripped the wheel and aimed the truck straight at her. Maybe hitting her would break the loop. Maybe it would make things worse. But he couldn't keep driving forever, couldn't keep passing the same mile marker for eternity. He pressed the accelerator, the engine roaring, the speedometer climbing. The woman raised her hand. Everything stopped. Not gradually, not with any sense of slowing down. One instant Robert was bearing down on her at 70 miles per hour, and the next instant the truck was motionless, the engine silent, the headlights dark. He sat in absolute stillness, his heart hammering, unable to move or speak. The woman walked to his window. Up close, Robert could see that she wasn't quite solid. There was a translucence to her, a quality of not quite there-ness that made his eyes hurt to look at directly. She placed her palm against the glass. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Or maybe there was sound, but it existed at a frequency Robert couldn't hear. In his mind, though, he understood what she was saying. This road remembers. It remembers everyone who ever drove it, every trucker who fell asleep at the wheel, every family on vacation, every drifter passing through. The highway remembers them all, and sometimes it keeps them, holds them in loops and spirals, playing out their journeys endlessly. She had been caught here in 1976, she told him without words. Died in a crash at mile marker 147, and the highway had held on to her ever since. She wasn't alone. There were others trapped in their own loops, driving their own eternal miles. But Robert was still alive. His body still breathed, his heart still beat. The highway had no claim on him yet. She could let him go. For a price. Robert understood. The price was memory. If he left the loop, he would forget this ever happened. Would forget her, forget the terror of these hours, forget the knowledge that highways could trap and hold and remember. He would arrive at his destination with no memory of anything wrong. Just a vague sense of lost time that he would attribute to fatigue. He wanted to refuse, wanted to insist on keeping his memories, on warning other drivers. But looking into her depthless eyes, Robert knew he had no choice. If he refused, he would drive mile marker 147 forever until he became as translucent and unreal as she was. He nodded. The woman removed her hand from the window. Reality snapped back like a rubber band. The engine roared to life, the headlights blazed, and Robert was moving again, driving east on Highway 50. The mile markers began advancing normally. 148, 149, 150. The rest area appeared on his right, exactly where it should be. Robert pulled in, parked, and sat shaking in his cab. He looked at his phone. It read 4:37 a.m. He'd lost 7 hours somewhere on that highway, though it had felt like much longer. The GPS showed a straight, normal route from Sacramento to Ely with no anomalies. The CB radio crackled with the usual trucker chatter. By the time Robert reached his destination and unloaded his cargo, he couldn't quite remember why his hands still trembled slightly. Something had happened on the drive, something unsettling, but the details were already fading like a dream. He told himself it was just exhaustion, just the loneliness of the road playing tricks on his mind. That made sense. That was logical. But sometimes late at night when he drives Highway 50, Robert finds himself slowing down at mile marker 147. And though he can't remember why, he always whispers a quiet thank you to the empty air before driving on. Story 2. The facility off exit 19. Patricia Sullivan had been hauling freight for Consolidated Transport for 18 years, and in that time she'd delivered to warehouses, distribution centers, and loading docks from Maine to California. She'd seen abandoned factories and bustling industrial parks, rural co-ops, and urban megacenters. But in March of 2023, Patricia received coordinates for a pickup that didn't appear on any map she could find, at a facility that shouldn't have existed. The job came through the dispatch system just after midnight. Patricia was parked at a truck stop outside of Springfield, Missouri, halfway through her mandatory rest period, when her phone buzzed with the notification. New pickup assignment. High priority. Immediate departure authorized. She rubbed sleep from her eyes and pulled up the details. The pickup location was listed as simply Facility 19. No company name, no street address. Just GPS coordinates and a note that read, Exit 19, County Road 4, follow signs. The delivery destination was a warehouse in Topeka, Kansas. Standard run, about 4 hours. The cargo was listed as Industrial Materials, Class A, no hazmat. The pay was triple her usual rate. Patricia stared at the screen. Triple rate for a 4-hour run of non-hazardous materials. That didn't make sense. High-priority loads usually involved time-sensitive cargo, pharmaceuticals or electronics that needed to reach their destination within narrow windows. Industrial materials didn't typically qualify. But the money was too good to pass up, and Patricia had learned not to question dispatch too closely. They paid her to drive, not to ask why. She started the truck and pulled out of the lot, heading west on Interstate 44. The highway was nearly empty at this hour, just the occasional pair of taillights in the distance and the endless white lines scrolling beneath her wheels. Patricia plugged the coordinates into her GPS and settled in for the drive. Exit 19 came up after about 40 minutes. Patricia had driven this stretch of interstate dozens of times and couldn't remember ever taking this particular exit. It didn't look like much, just a standard off-ramp leading to a 2-lane county road that disappeared into dark forests. No gas stations, no signs of civilization. The GPS showed her turning right and following County Road 4 for approximately 8 miles. Patricia downshifted and took the exit. The truck's headlights swept across trees pressing close to the road, their branches forming a canopy overhead. She'd expected to see signs for the facility, some indication that this road led somewhere other than deeper into the woods. But there was nothing, just the road and the trees and the darkness. After 5 miles, she started wondering if she'd made a wrong turn somehow. The GPS insisted she was on the correct route, the blue line showing County Road 4 extending ahead. But this didn't feel right. Facilities that received semi-truck deliveries didn't hide themselves in the middle of forests. They needed good access roads, turning areas for large vehicles, infrastructure. Then she saw the first sign, a simple reflective marker at the roadside reading Facility 19, 2 miles, authorized personnel only. No logo, no company name, just that stark warning and an arrow pointing ahead. Patricia felt a small knot of unease form in her stomach, but she kept driving. She had a job to do. The second sign appeared a mile later. Facility 19, 1 mile. All visitors must check in. Check in where? Patricia hadn't seen any buildings, any guard shacks, any indication that anyone lived or worked out here. Just trees and darkness and that narrow ribbon of asphalt. The facility appeared suddenly as she rounded a curve. One moment there was nothing but forest. The next moment her headlights were reflecting off a massive chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Beyond the fence, Patricia could see a sprawling complex of low concrete buildings, all of them dark. No lights in the windows, no security lights illuminating the grounds, no vehicles in the parking areas. The place looked completely abandoned. A gate blocked the road, but it stood open. Another sign read, Facility 19, Loading Dock C, proceed to Building 7. Patricia eased the truck through the gate, the tires crunching on gravel. Her headlights swept across the buildings as she navigated the complex. Every structure was identical. Plain concrete walls with no windows, numbered doors, no indication of what purpose they served. Building 1, Building 2, Building 3. She found Building 7 at the back of the complex, its loading dock illuminated by a single sodium vapor light that cast everything in harsh orange. A roll-up door was open, showing a dark interior. Patricia backed the trailer up to the dock with practiced precision, set the brake, and killed the engine. Silence crashed down. Not the comfortable silence of an empty highway, but something deeper and more oppressive. No wind rustling the trees, no insects chirping, no distant traffic sounds. Just absolute crushing quiet. Patricia sat in her cab, suddenly reluctant to get out. Something about this place felt wrong, felt like a violation of natural law. Her phone buzzed, a text from dispatch. Cargo is preloaded. Seal trailer and depart. Do not enter facility. Do not attempt to verify cargo. Proceed directly to delivery. Patricia read the message 3 times. Do not enter facility. Do not attempt to verify cargo. In 18 years of trucking, she'd never received instructions like that. Drivers always verified their cargo before hauling it. That was basic protocol. You needed to know what you were carrying, how much it weighed, how it was secured. Patricia grabbed her flashlight and climbed out of the cab. Her boots hit the concrete dock with a sound that echoed too long in the silence. The roll-up door led into Building 7's interior, pitch black beyond the reach of the sodium light. She stepped to the edge of the illuminated area and shone her flashlight inside. The trailer was there, backed up to the dock as she'd positioned it. But something was wrong with it. The trailer looked different. Same model, same company logo, but somehow not quite her trailer. The paint was too clean. The license plate numbers were different. Patricia moved closer, her heart beginning to pound. Inside the trailer, she could see cargo. Wooden crates, dozens of them, neatly stacked and strapped down. They looked old, the wood weathered and dark. Stenciled on each crate in faded white paint were alphanumeric codes that Patricia didn't recognize. And beneath the codes, smaller text. She had to get closer to read it. Property of U.S. government, authorized personnel only, warning contents hazardous. Patricia backed away from the trailer. Government cargo, hazardous materials. But dispatch had specifically said no hazmat. Said it was industrial materials, Class A, nothing dangerous. Why would they lie? She pulled out her phone to call dispatch to demand an explanation, but she had no signal. Not one bar, not even an emergency connection. A sound came from deeper inside Building 7, a soft mechanical hum like something powering up. Patricia's flashlight beam swept across the interior and caught something that made her breath catch. Shapes in the darkness. Large shapes, vaguely humanoid but wrong in proportions, and they were moving. Patricia ran, sprinted back to her cab, climbed inside and locked the doors. Her hands shook as she started the engine. The shapes had reached the edge of the light now, and Patricia could see them clearly. Not people. Not anything close to people. Things that walked on 2 legs but had joints that bent the wrong way. Heads that were too large and too angular, skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She put the truck in gear and drove. Didn't check to see if the trailer was properly secured, didn't worry about paperwork or protocols. Just drove straight ahead, away from Building 7 and those impossible things that had emerged from its darkness. The truck crashed through the open gate, bounced onto County Road 4, and Patricia pushed the accelerator to the floor. Behind her, in her mirrors, she could see lights coming on in the facility. Not normal lights, but a harsh blue-white glow that didn't illuminate so much as expose, making everything it touched look stark and unnatural. The shapes were following her, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. They reached the gate and stopped there, as if some invisible boundary prevented them from leaving the facility grounds. Patricia drove in terrified silence until she reached Interstate 44. Only when she was back on the highway, surrounded by normal traffic and street lights and civilization, Did she allow herself to breathe? She pulled into the first truck stop she found and sat in the parking lot shaking. Her phone buzzed. Another text from dispatch. Delivery canceled. Return to Springfield Terminal immediately. Debrief required. Patricia looked at the trailer in her side mirror. It was her normal trailer again, with the correct license plates and familiar wear patterns. No cargo inside. Empty. The GPS showed no record of exit 19. County Road 4 didn't appear on any map. When Patricia tried to explain what had happened to her dispatcher, he looked at her with concern and suggested she might need some time off. Too many long hauls, too much stress. Maybe she dozed off and dreamed the whole thing. But Patricia knows what she saw. Knows that somewhere off Interstate 44 there's a facility that shouldn't exist, filled with cargo that defies explanation, and inhabited by things that aren't quite alive. She refuses all routes through Missouri now. Takes the long way around, even if it adds hours to her drive. Because some deliveries aren't worth making no matter how much they pay. And late at night, when she passes highway exits she doesn't recognize, Patricia keeps driving, never looks too closely at the signs, never follows unmarked roads into dark forests. Because she knows now that some places exist outside the normal world, hidden in the spaces between the maps, and once you've seen them, they never quite let you go. Story 3. The Voice on Channel 19. Marcus Thompson had driven trucks for Continental Freight for 15 years, and in all that time his CB radio had been his constant companion. Channel 19 was the truckers' channel, where drivers warned each other about speed traps and accidents, shared jokes and stories, passed the long, lonely hours with voices that reminded you that you weren't completely alone out there on the highways. But in July of 2021, Marcus picked up a transmission on Channel 19 that made him question everything he thought he knew about the voices on the radio. It was just past 2 in the morning, and Marcus was hauling a load of electronics from Charlotte to Atlanta. Interstate 85 stretched empty before him, the highway slick with recent rain, his wipers beating a steady rhythm against the drizzle. The CB crackled with occasional chatter, drivers complaining about the weather and discussing which truck stops had the best coffee. Normal conversations, familiar voices. Then the static changed, became thicker somehow, denser, like it was trying to form itself into something solid. Marcus reached for the volume knob, thinking maybe his radio was acting up, when a voice emerged from the white noise. Northbound at mile marker 117, you need to stop. Marcus frowned. He was northbound, and according to his GPS, he was approaching mile marker 117. But he didn't recognize the voice. It was male, middle-aged, with an odd flatness to it. No emotion, no inflection, just those words delivered in a monotone that made Marcus's skin crawl. He keyed his mic. This is Big M northbound on 85. Who's calling? Static. Then, you need to stop at mile marker 117. It's important. Who is this? What's your handle? No response. Just that thick, oppressive static that seemed to press against Marcus's eardrums. He was approaching mile marker 117 now, a stretch of highway with nothing but trees on either side and an emergency pull-off area on the right shoulder. No reason to stop, no visible problems. But something about that voice made him uneasy. Marcus kept driving. The mile marker flashed past in his headlights. Nothing happened. No accident, no hazard, nothing out of the ordinary. He breathed a sigh of relief and told himself it had been a prank. Some asshole with a radio and too much time on his hands playing games. You should have stopped, the voice said. Marcus jerked in his seat. Look, I don't know who you are, but I'm not in the mood for games. I've got a schedule to keep. You had a schedule. Past tense. You should have stopped. The radio fell silent. Marcus waited, but the voice didn't return. The normal CB chatter resumed, other drivers discussing routes and weather. Marcus tried to put the strange transmission out of his mind and focus on driving. Just a few more hours to Atlanta, unload the cargo, grab some rest. Everything was fine, except nothing felt fine. Marcus couldn't shake the sensation that something had changed when he passed mile marker 117. The rain seemed heavier now, drumming on the truck's roof with greater intensity. The road felt different beneath his tires, the handling slightly off in a way he couldn't quite define. And the other voices on the CB, the familiar drivers he'd been half listening to for the past hour, had stopped talking. Now there was only static. Channel 19, this is Big M looking for any northbound traffic on 85. Anybody out there? Marcus called. Static answered him. This is Big M calling any station. Someone come back. Static. Marcus switched channels, 2 through 40, each one filled with that same thick pressing static. Not one human voice, not one response. He tried his phone. No signal. The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m. The GPS showed him moving north on Interstate 85, approaching mile marker 132. The headlights of another vehicle appeared in Marcus's rearview mirror. Finally, another driver. Marcus slowed slightly, intending to let the vehicle pass so he could flag them down, ask if their radio was working. But the vehicle matched his speed, staying exactly the same distance behind him. When Marcus accelerated, it accelerated. When he slowed, it slowed. Northbound at mile marker 137, you need to exit. The voice again, emerging from the static. Marcus grabbed his mic. Who are you? What's happening? Exit at mile marker 140. Don't continue north. It's important. What are you talking about? Why can't I continue north? Because, the voice said. And for the first time, Marcus heard something like emotion in it, something like sadness. You already died. At mile marker 117, you didn't stop. There was a truck. It crossed the median. You hit it head on. This is just the road remembering you, playing out what should have happened. Marcus felt ice flood his veins. That's bullshit. I'm alive. I'm driving. This is real. Is it? Look at the road. Really look. Marcus looked. And now that the voice had pointed it out, he could see the wrongness. The highway stretched too straight ahead, too perfect. The mile markers were advancing, but the scenery never changed. Same trees, same darkness, same rain. Like a loop playing endlessly. And that vehicle behind him, the one matching his speed exactly, had no headlights, just two dark holes where the lights should be. This can't be happening, Marcus whispered. It happens to more drivers than you'd think, the voice said. The ones who die on the highway but don't realize it. The ones who keep driving, keep trying to make their deliveries because that's what they do. The road holds on to them, plays out their routes over and over. I've been trying to help, trying to warn drivers before the accidents happen. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. Who are you? Silence on the radio. Then, my name was David Kowalski. I drove for 30 years, died on this same stretch of 85 in 2006. Fell asleep at the wheel, crossed the median, hit another truck, killed myself and the other driver. The road kept me, wouldn't let me go. And eventually I figured out that I could use the CB, could reach out to other drivers. Some I've saved, you I couldn't. Marcus gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. I don't believe you. I'm not dead. I can't be dead. Exit at mile marker 140, please. If you exit, maybe you can break the loop. Maybe you can move on. It's the only chance you have. Mile marker 140 appeared in Marcus's headlights. An exit ramp curved away to the right, leading to a town Marcus had never heard of. Every instinct screamed at him to keep driving, to maintain his route, to deliver his cargo. That was his job. That was who he was. But the voice, David Kowalski's voice, sounded so tired and so desperate. Marcus took the exit. The moment his truck left the highway, everything changed. The rain stopped, the darkness lifted, and Marcus found himself driving not on a ramp, but on a road made of light, a luminous path that curved upward into a sky full of stars. The weight of the cargo behind him disappeared. The truck's engine went silent, and ahead, at the end of that impossible road, Marcus could see figures waiting. People he recognized. His father, who died when Marcus was 12. His best friend from high school, killed in a motorcycle accident. They were waving to him, calling him home. Marcus looked in his rearview mirror one last time. Back on Interstate 85, barely visible now, he could see the loop he'd been trapped in. His truck, or the echo of his truck, still driving north through endless rain. Still trying to make a delivery that would never happen. And somewhere on Channel 19, David Kowalski's voice, warning another driver, trying to save one more soul from the highway's hungry grasp. Marcus put his foot on the accelerator and drove toward the light. Behind him, the loop finally broke. The highway released him, and on Channel 19, for just a moment, the static cleared and drivers up and down Interstate 85 heard a sound like someone sighing in relief. The next morning, authorities found Marcus Thompson's truck at mile marker 117, crumpled against another semi that had crossed the median. Both drivers were killed instantly. The investigating officer noted that Marcus's CB radio was still on, tuned to Channel 19, broadcasting nothing but empty static to the unhearing air. But sometimes late at night, when drivers are running Interstate 85 between Charlotte and Atlanta, they pick up a transmission, a voice warning them about hazards ahead, telling them where to exit, which routes to avoid, a voice that knows things it shouldn't be able to know. And when those drivers listen, when they heed the warnings, they arrive safely at their destinations, never knowing that someone who'd learned the highway's secrets the hard way had just saved their lives. David Kowalski keeps broadcasting, keeps trying to help. And now Marcus Thompson broadcasts with him. Two voices on Channel 19, guardians of a highway that claimed them but couldn't quite make them surrender. Story 4. The Vanishing Town. Elena Rodriguez had been a long-haul trucker for 12 years, specializing in routes through the American Southwest. She knew the desert highways intimately, could navigate from Phoenix to Albuquerque with her eyes half closed, recognized every truck stop and landmark between El Paso and Tucson. But in November of 2022, Elena drove through a town that erased itself from existence the moment she left it, and she spent every day since trying to convince anyone that it was real. The run started normally enough. Elena picked up a load of furniture from a warehouse in Phoenix bound for a distribution center in Albuquerque. She'd made this trip dozens of times, usually taking Interstate 40 the whole way, but this time her GPS suggested an alternate route that would save her almost an hour. Highway 60 through the Salt River Canyon, then smaller state routes cutting northeast through the mountains. Elena normally didn't trust GPS shortcuts. Too many times she'd been led down roads that couldn't accommodate a semi-truck. But an hour was an hour, and she was already running behind schedule. She took Highway 60 and settled in for the drive through the canyon, watching the landscape transform from desert flatlands to pine forests as elevation increased. The GPS directed her onto State Route 373 as sunset painted the sky orange and purple. This was a road Elena didn't recognize, 2 lanes winding through mountains covered in ponderosa pines. No traffic in either direction, no signs of civilization. Just the road and the trees and the fading light. After about 30 miles, the GPS announced, "Arriving at Millerton, service is available." Elena perked up. She needed fuel and a bathroom break, and a small mountain town sounded perfect. She rounded a curve, and there it was, spread out in a valley below her. Millerton. Except Elena had never heard of Millerton before, and she knew this region well. The town looked sizable, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 people, with a main street lined with shops, a few churches with white steeples, residential neighborhoods spreading up the hillsides. Streetlights were coming on as darkness fell, warm pools of illumination that made the town look cozy and inviting. Elena descended into the valley and followed the main street looking for a gas station. The town was busy for early evening, people walking on sidewalks, cars parked along the curbs, businesses with their lights on. She passed a diner called the Copper Kettle, a hardware store, a pharmacy, a movie theater with a marquee advertising films Elena didn't recognize. Everything looked normal. Everything looked real. She found a gas station called Mountain View Fuel and pulled in. An older man in coveralls emerged from the office, smiling. "Evening, ma'am. Diesel?" "Please," Elena said. "Fill it up. And where's your restroom?" "Around back. Keys on the counter inside." Elena stretched her legs while the man pumped diesel into her tanks. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke, crisp and clean. She could hear music coming from somewhere nearby, country songs she didn't recognize. Down the street, the lights of the diner glowed warm and yellow. Everything about Millerton felt comfortable, lived in, real. She paid for the fuel in cash, the old man insisting that his credit card machine was down, sorry for the inconvenience. Elena didn't mind. She grabbed a coffee from inside, asked the man how long he'd lived in Millerton. "My whole life," he said. 72 years come December. Born in the hospital right up that hill, probably die in the same place." He laughed. "Town's not much, but it's home." "It seems nice," Elena said, "on quiet." "That's the appeal. We get some tourists in summer, folks heading to the national forest, but mostly we're left alone. Like it that way." Elena climbed back in her truck and continued through town. The GPS showed the route continuing on the far side of Millerton, State Route 373, picking up again and heading northeast toward Albuquerque. But as she drove, something began to feel wrong. The people on the sidewalks were looking at her truck with strange intensity. Not casual glances, but focused stares. And nobody was moving. She passed a woman standing in front of the pharmacy, absolutely motionless, her eyes tracking Elena's truck. A man on the corner stood frozen mid-step, one foot raised, staring. A group of teenagers outside the movie theater all turned in unison to watch her pass. Elena accelerated, suddenly desperate to be out of this town, despite how welcoming it had seemed moments before. Something was wrong here, something beneath the surface, hidden behind the pretty facade. The streetlights began to flicker. Not all at once, but in sequence, like a wave passing through the town. And in the brief moments of darkness between flickers, Elena saw something else. The buildings looked different, older, decayed, like she was seeing through the present into some other time. The diner became a burnt-out shell. The hardware store was boarded up with shattered windows. The church steeples were collapsed ruins. Elena pushed the truck faster, the speed limit be damned. She needed out of Millerton right now. The edge of town appeared ahead, darkness beyond the last streetlight. She accelerated toward it, and the moment her truck crossed that invisible boundary, everything changed. The road behind her was empty. No town, no lights, just darkness and pine forest and the white line of State Route 373 stretching into the night. Elena slammed on her brakes, the truck shuddering to a stop. She stared into her mirrors, but there was nothing. Millerton had vanished. She grabbed her phone. The map app showed her location on State Route 373, but there was no town marked anywhere nearby. She backed up slowly, retracing her route. After half a mile, she reached a spot where she thought the town's edge should be. Nothing, just road and trees. She drove forward again, searching for any sign that a community of 5,000 or 6,000 people existed in this valley. Found nothing. Elena pulled over and sat in the darkness, her heart pounding. She'd stopped for fuel, she'd talked to the attendant, she'd driven through the streets. It had been real. But her phone insisted there was no Millerton anywhere in this part of Arizona. Her GPS history showed no record of routing her through a town. According to every piece of technology she had, she'd driven straight through on State Route 373 without stopping. But Elena knew she'd stopped. She checked her fuel gauge. It read full. She'd had less than a quarter tank before Millerton. Someone or something had filled her tanks. She checked her wallet. The cash she'd used to pay was gone. The coffee cup from Mountain View Fuel sat in her cup holder, warm and real and impossible. She drove on to Albuquerque in numb silence, delivered her cargo, and immediately filed a report with her dispatcher. Tried to explain what had happened. They suggested she was overtired, that she'd stopped at some other gas station and gotten confused. But Elena insisted. Millerton was real. She'd been there. She described the main street, the diner, the old man at the gas station. Her dispatcher looked uncomfortable and admitted that there had been other reports. Not many, maybe one every few years, but other drivers had claimed to pass through towns that didn't exist, towns that vanished. Most drivers never reported it, afraid of sounding crazy, but there were files, incidents dating back decades. Elena spent weeks trying to find Millerton. She bought topographic maps, studied satellite imagery, drove the route repeatedly. Never found it. The valley where she remembered seeing the town was empty, just forest and a small creek. No foundations, no roads, no evidence that anyone had ever lived there. But other truckers, when Elena told her story at truck stops and rest areas, would sometimes nod in recognition. They'd seen places like Millerton, towns that shouldn't exist, truck stops that appeared once and never again. Highways that led to nowhere. The roads held secrets, they said, held echoes of places that used to be or maybe never were, or maybe existed in some sideways version of reality that overlapped with the normal world in strange ways. Elena still drives the southwest routes, still takes State Route 373 sometimes, hoping to see Millerton again. She wants to talk to the old man at the gas station, wants to walk through the diner, wants to understand what she experienced. Because despite what the maps say, despite what the GPS insists, Elena knows she was there. The coffee cup in her truck proves it, the logo for Mountain View Fuel bright and clear even as it fades with age. And late at night, when she's driving through the mountains and sees lights in valleys that shouldn't be there, Elena sometimes considers taking an exit she doesn't recognize, following a road that doesn't appear on any map. Maybe she'll find Millerton again. Maybe she'll find answers. Or maybe she'll disappear like the town did, becoming another story truckers tell each other in the small hours. Another warning that the roads you travel aren't always as solid and reliable as they seem. Story 5. The Passenger in the Sleeper. James Kowalski had been driving freight for 20 years without incident. He knew every mile of Interstate 80 between New York and San Francisco, could tell you which rest stops had the cleanest bathrooms and which way stations were most likely to pull you over for inspection. But in September of 2023, somewhere between Cheyenne and Salt Lake City, James discovered that he'd been traveling with a passenger he never picked up, and that discovery nearly cost him his sanity. The run started in Newark with a load of machine parts bound for Sacramento. Standard cross-country haul, 4 days of driving with mandatory rest stops built into the schedule. James left just after dawn, feeling good about the trip ahead. The truck was running smoothly, the weather forecast was clear, and he had enough audiobooks downloaded to keep him entertained across the entire country. By the second night, he was in Wyoming, driving through darkness with Interstate 80 stretching empty ahead. The wind buffeted the truck, constant and strong like it always was in Wyoming, but James was used to it. He'd turned off his audiobook and was just enjoying the silence, the meditative quality of night driving, when he heard something from the sleeper berth behind him. A cough. Soft but distinct. Someone clearing their throat. James nearly drove off the road. He jerked the wheel, overcorrected, got the truck back under control with his heart hammering. The sleeper berth was directly behind the driver's seat, separated by a curtain. It was where drivers slept during mandatory rest periods. James's sleeper contained a mattress, a small storage area for clothes, and absolutely nothing else. He'd been alone in this truck since Newark. There was no one back there. He pulled over onto the shoulder, set the brake, and sat breathing hard. Had to be his imagination. The wind making strange sounds, maybe something shifting in the cargo. That was logical. That made sense. But James couldn't shake the certainty that he'd heard a human cough. "Hello?" he called toward the sleeper. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." The voice was male, pleasant, coming definitely from the sleeper berth. James grabbed his tire iron from beside the seat and yanked the curtain open, the iron raised and ready. The sleeper was empty. Just his mattress and pillow, his duffel bag of clothes, his toiletry kit. No space for anyone to hide. But the voice had been right there, close enough that James should be able to see whoever was speaking. "Where are you?" James demanded. "Show yourself." "I'm right here," the voice said. "I've been here since you left Newark. You just couldn't hear me until now." James stared at the empty sleeper. "This isn't funny. Get out of my truck right now or I'm calling the cops." "I can't get out. I'm stuck. Have been for years." The voice sounded sad. "My name's Raymond. I used to drive this truck, used to be my rig before the company sold it. And when they sold it, they didn't realize I was still here." "You're insane," James said. "There's nobody there. I'm looking right at the sleeper, and it's empty." "Of course it's empty. I'm not exactly solid anymore. Had a heart attack in this truck 5 years ago, pulled over on this same stretch of Interstate 80. By the time anyone found me, it was too late. And somehow I ended up stuck here. In the truck. Can't leave. Can't move on. Just riding along with whoever drives it." James sat frozen, the tire iron still raised. This couldn't be happening. He didn't believe in ghosts. Didn't believe in hauntings. But the voice was real. Coming from a space he could see was empty, and the terror crawling up his spine felt very, very genuine. "You're not real," James said. "You're some kind of hallucination, carbon monoxide or something." "I wish that was true," Raymond said. "Would make this easier. But I'm real, or at least as real as I can be anymore. And I'm telling you now because we're approaching mile marker 315. That's where I died. That's where it's strongest. You need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For when it happens again. When I die again. The truck remembers, you see. Remembers that moment, and every time we pass this spot, it replays. For you, for me, for anyone inside. You need to be ready, or it'll drive you right off the road." James started the truck and pulled back onto the highway. This was insane. He needed to get to the next truck stop, needed to call his dispatcher, maybe call a doctor. He was having some kind of breakdown, hallucinating voices. That was the only explanation that made sense. Mile marker 315 appeared in his headlights. Pain exploded in James's chest. Not pain like he'd been injured, but pain like his heart was seizing up, muscles cramping, breath cutting off. He gasped and clutched his chest, the truck swerving. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but experience the crushing agony of a massive coronary. Then it passed. The pain vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving James gasping and sweating and barely keeping the truck on the road. "Sorry," Raymond's voice said quietly. "I tried to warn you. It happens every time. The truck remembers my death and makes everyone inside experience it, just for a moment. Just long enough to know what it felt like." James pulled over again, shaking too hard to drive. He sat with his head in his hands trying to process what had just happened. Medical episode. Had to be. He was having a heart attack. That was real. The voice was a hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation. He grabbed his phone to call 911. "You're fine," Raymond said. "Your heart's okay. It was my pain, not yours. Check your vitals if you don't believe me." James felt his pulse. Steady, strong, breathing normally now. No lingering pain. He pulled up a health app on his phone that connected to his smartwatch. All readings normal. Not having a heart attack. Had never been having a heart attack. So what the hell had just happened? "I told you," Raymond said. "The truck remembers. Replays it. You'll experience it every time you pass mile marker 315. Unless you get rid of this rig, trade it in for a different truck. But then whoever gets it next will deal with me. I've ridden with 14 different drivers since I died. Most of them trade the truck in after a few weeks. Can't handle the replays. Can't handle hearing my voice. I don't blame them." James sat in silence, trying to think. Option 1. He was having a psychotic break. Option 2. His truck was genuinely haunted by the ghost of a dead driver. Neither option was good, but option 2 at least explained everything he'd experienced. The voice, the pain at mile marker 315. The fact that he'd felt completely normal before tonight and was apparently still physically healthy. "Why now?" James asked. "If you've been here since Newark, why can I only hear you now?" "It's this stretch of road," Raymond explained, "where I died. It's like a thin spot. Makes it easier for me to manifest. Easier for you to perceive me. By the time you get to Utah, it'll fade again. You probably won't hear me for months, but I'll still be here. Still riding along. Sorry about that. Can't you move on? Go toward the light or whatever." Raymond laughed bitterly. "You think I haven't tried? I'm stuck. Tied to this truck somehow. Can't leave it. Can't do anything but ride along and watch the miles roll past and experience my death over and over again every time we pass that marker. It's hell, if you want to know the truth. A very specific, very boring kind of hell." James started driving again. What else could he do? He had a delivery to make, had a schedule to keep. And if his truck was haunted, well, he dealt with worse problems on the road. At least this ghost seemed friendly. At least Raymond was just trapped, not malevolent. They drove in silence for hours. James kept expecting the voice to return, but Raymond stayed quiet. Just a presence James could almost feel in the sleeper behind him. By the time he reached Utah, the sun was rising and James felt almost normal again. He could almost convince himself that the whole thing had been exhaustion-induced hallucination. Then, as he pulled into a truck stop outside of Salt Lake City, he heard Raymond's voice one more time. "Thank you for not crashing, for not trading in the truck immediately. Most drivers panic. You kept it together. I appreciate that." "Are you really stuck here?" James asked. "Is there really no way to free you?" "I don't know," Raymond admitted. "Maybe if someone figured out why I'm tied to the truck, they could break the connection. But who's going to believe in a haunted semi-truck? Who's going to investigate? I'm just stuck until this rig gets scrapped, and even then I don't know what happens. Maybe I finally move on. Maybe I just cease to exist. Maybe I get transferred to whatever machine they recycle this truck into. No way to know." James thought about that as he parked and climbed out to stretch. Thought about Raymond trapped in the sleeper, experiencing his death repeatedly, unable to move on or find peace. It seemed like a terrible fate, even for a ghost. He made a decision. "I'll help you," James said. "I don't know how yet, but I'll try to figure out what's keeping you here. Maybe we can break whatever's holding you." Silence from the truck. Then very quietly, "Why would you do that? I'm not your problem." "Because," James said, Nobody should be trapped like that, living or dead, and I've got a lot of driving ahead of me. Might as well have a purpose beyond just hauling cargo. Over the next months, James researched hauntings between his runs. Talked to paranormal investigators, consulted with mediums, read everything he could find about spirits tied to objects. Most of it was nonsense, but slowly he pieced together a theory. Raymond wasn't tied to the physical truck, but to the vehicle identification number, the unique code that defined this particular vehicle. As long as that VIN existed in records, Raymond was trapped. Getting a VIN officially retired was nearly impossible. The paperwork, the bureaucracy, the questions, but James was persistent. He documented the mechanical issues with the truck, the persistent problems that made it unreliable. Built a case for it to be decommissioned rather than resold. It took 2 years of careful work, but finally he succeeded. The truck was sent to be scrapped, its VIN permanently retired from all databases. The night before the truck was scheduled for destruction, James sat in the cab one last time. "Tomorrow you're free," he said. "Whatever happens, you won't be tied to this truck anymore." "Thank you," Raymond's voice said, stronger than James had ever heard it. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for caring. I don't know what comes next, but anything's better than this. Anything's better than being stuck." The next day, James watched as the truck was crushed and processed. He stood in the salvage yard until the last piece of metal disappeared into the recycling system. And as the final crushing blow fell, he felt something change in the air. A release, a letting go. That night, James had a dream. Raymond appeared to him looking solid and real and genuinely happy. "I'm free," Raymond said. "Found the light, found whatever comes next. Couldn't move on without saying goodbye, without saying thank you one more time." "Did you find peace?" James asked. "I think so," Raymond said. "Or I'm about to. Either way, I'm not trapped anymore. That's enough." He started to fade. "Drive safe, James. And if you ever hear voices in your next truck, maybe believe them. Maybe help them too. The roads hold more lost souls than you'd think." James woke up alone in his motel room. He checked his phone and saw a message from his dispatcher. New truck assignment. Different model, different VIN, completely different vehicle. James accepted the assignment and drove, on carrying Raymond's story with him. And whenever he passes mile marker 315 on Interstate 80, he whispers a quiet prayer for the soul that found freedom there. And for all the other voices still calling out from the darkness, waiting for someone to believe them, waiting for someone to care enough to set them free. Story 6. The Truck That Followed. Gerald Mitchell had driven trucks for Continental Express for 26 years, and in all that time he'd never been followed. Oh, he'd dealt with aggressive drivers, sure. Impatient cars weaving through traffic, motorcycles riding too close, the occasional road rage incident. But those encounters ended when he changed routes or pulled over or just waited them out. What started happening to Gerald in January of 2022 was different. The truck that appeared in his mirrors near Des Moines, Iowa, didn't just follow him for a few miles. It followed him for 9 states and 2,000 miles, matching every turn, every stop, every deviation from his planned route. And the more Gerald looked at it, the more wrong it seemed. The truck appeared just after midnight. Gerald had picked up a load in Chicago, heading west to Denver. Interstate 80 stretched empty before him, and he was making good time through Iowa when headlights emerged from the darkness behind him. Another semi-truck maintaining steady distance. Gerald thought nothing of it. Trucks traveled together sometimes, especially at night. It was reassuring to have company on the empty highways. By the time Gerald reached Council Bluffs, the truck was still there. Same distance, same position. Gerald took the exit to fuel up and expected the other truck to continue past. Instead, it followed him off the interstate. Followed him to the truck stop. parked 3 spaces away from Gerald's rig. Gerald climbed out of his cab and looked at the other truck. It was a Peterbilt, painted flat black with no company logos or identification markings. The kind of truck owner-operators sometimes drove, though most of them displayed at least their name or some kind of decoration. This truck was completely anonymous. No lights on in the cab, no sign of the driver. Gerald fueled up, used the restroom, grabbed a coffee. When he came back out, the black truck was still there, still dark, still apparently empty. Gerald walked over to it, intending to knock on the door and maybe chat with the driver. As he got closer, he noticed something odd. The truck had no license plates, front or back, just empty mounting brackets where the plates should be. And the windows were tinted so dark that he couldn't see inside at all, even standing right next to the cab. "Hey," Gerald called out. "You okay in there?" No response, no movement from inside. Gerald tried the door handle, locked. He knocked on the window, nothing. Unease crawled up his spine, a truck with no plates, no identification, and an apparently absent driver. That wasn't right. That violated every regulation he could think of. He pulled out his phone to call the police, but then hesitated. Report what exactly? A suspicious truck at a public truck stop? The cops would probably tell him it wasn't their problem. Owner-operators did weird things sometimes. Maybe this driver just valued privacy. Gerald got back in his own truck and pulled out of the truck stop. In his mirrors, he saw the black truck start up and follow. Same distance, same position, as if they were connected by an invisible tether. For the next 300 miles, the black truck followed. Through Nebraska, keeping pace whether Gerald drove fast or slow. He tried speeding up to 85 miles per hour. The black truck accelerated to match. He slowed to 55. So did his shadow. He changed lanes randomly, weaving between the sparse late-night traffic. The black truck mimicked his movements exactly, always maintaining that same distance. Gerald's radio crackled. He'd been monitoring Channel 19, listening to other truckers chat about weather and routes. Now he keyed his mic. "Breaker 19, this is Jerry the Bear westbound on 80. Anyone else seeing a black Peterbilt with no plates running with us?" Static. Then a voice responded. "Negative, Jerry. Don't see anything matching that description. You got a tail?" "Yeah, but it's weird. Truck's been following me since Des Moines. No plates, no markings, can't see the driver. Just staying behind me like we're in a convoy." Silence on the radio. Then a different voice, older and wary. "Black Peterbilt, you said? No plates." "That's right. You might want to lose that tail, friend. I've heard stories about a truck like that, nothing good." "What kind of stories?" "The kind that don't have happy endings. Drivers who get followed by that truck tend to disappear, or have accidents, or just go missing. I don't know if it's real or just an urban legend, but I wouldn't take chances." Gerald felt ice form in his stomach. He looked in his mirrors. The black truck was still there, headlights steady, maintaining perfect distance. "How do I lose it?" "I don't know if you can. Like I said, just stories. But maybe try something unexpected. Take an exit it won't expect. Try to break whatever pattern it's following." Gerald took the next exit without signaling, jerking the wheel at the last second and barely making the off-ramp. The black truck followed, executing the same sudden turn with impossible precision. Gerald drove through a small Nebraska town, turning randomly, trying to shake his pursuer. The black truck matched every turn. Left, right, straight, circling back. It didn't matter. The truck stayed with him. Eventually, Gerald had to return to the interstate. He had a delivery to make, a schedule to keep. He couldn't just drive in circles forever. Back on 80, heading west, the black truck resumed its position behind him. Following, watching, waiting. By the time Gerald reached Wyoming, the sun was rising. In daylight, the black truck looked even more wrong. The paint was too perfect, too matte, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. The windows were impenetrable, and despite hours of driving, it showed no road dirt. No bugs splattered on the windshield. Nothing. It looked like it had just rolled off a factory floor, though it had been following Gerald for nearly 600 miles. He tried pulling over multiple times. The black truck always parked nearby and waited. Gerald tried calling the police from several different towns, reporting the truck. Officers would come to investigate, but they couldn't see anything wrong. To them, it looked like just another semi-truck parked legally. They asked Gerald if he'd been sleeping enough, if he was on any medications. Suggested maybe he was overreacting, but Gerald knew what he was seeing. This wasn't paranoia, this wasn't exhaustion. The truck was following him deliberately, and it wanted him to know. On the second night, approaching the Wyoming-Utah border, Gerald's CB radio crackled to life. Not with voices, but with something else. A sound like breathing. Deep, rhythmic, mechanical breathing. Then words barely audible beneath the static. "Stop running, it's time." Gerald grabbed his mic with shaking hands. "Who is this? What do you want?" The breathing continued then. "You're overdue, should have been ours 3 years ago. The accident that should have happened. The crash that should have killed you. You survived. That wasn't supposed to happen. We're here to collect what was owed." Gerald remembered 3 years ago. A close call outside of Kansas City. A tire blowout that should have sent him careening off an overpass. He'd managed to control it somehow, keep the truck steady, bring it to a safe stop. Pure luck. Pure chance. Or so he'd thought. "I'm not dead," Gerald said. "I survived. That means I get to keep living." Nothing survives forever. Everything has its time. Yours was 3 years ago. We've been looking for you. Now we've found you. Now we follow until you make a mistake. Until the debt is paid. The CB went dead. Gerald drove through the night in terror. The black truck following inexorably. He couldn't sleep, couldn't stop. Every time he started to pull over, the black truck would inch closer and Gerald would panic and keep driving. Mile after mile, hour after hour. The truck matching his every move. By the third day, Gerald was hallucinating from exhaustion. Seeing things in his peripheral vision, hearing voices. But the black truck remained constant. Always there, always following. He knew he couldn't keep driving forever, knew he would eventually have to sleep or he'd crash. And maybe that's what the truck wanted. Maybe it was waiting for him to be so tired that he made a fatal mistake. Gerald made a decision. If the truck wanted him dead, if it represented some kind of cosmic debt collector, then running wouldn't help. He had to confront it, face whatever was coming. Near Salt Lake City, Gerald pulled into an empty rest area, parked his truck, waited. The black truck pulled in and parked directly across from him, engine idling, windows dark. Gerald climbed out of his cab and walked toward it. His legs shook, but he forced himself forward. If this was death coming for him, he'd meet it standing. He reached the black truck and placed his palm against the driver's door. The metal was ice cold, unnaturally so. Gerald felt the cold seep through his hand, up his arm toward his chest, and in that moment of contact, he understood. The black truck wasn't a vehicle. It was a manifestation, a physical representation of something that existed outside normal reality. It collected those who should have died but didn't, those who cheated fate, and it followed them until fate caught up. But Gerald also understood something else. The truck couldn't force him to have an accident, couldn't make him crash. It could only follow and wait and hope. It fed on fear and exhaustion, trying to create the conditions for a fatal mistake. But if Gerald refused to be afraid, refused to run, the truck had no power over him. He stepped back from the black truck and spoke loudly. "I survived. That was my right, my luck, my skill, and I'm not afraid of you. Follow me if you want, follow me forever, but I'm not going to crash. I'm not going to die just because you think I should have 3 years ago. I choose to live." The black truck sat silent. Then slowly it began to fade. Not drive away, but actually fade, becoming translucent. Gerald could see through it to the parking lot beyond. Within seconds it had vanished completely, leaving only empty space where it had been parked. Gerald stood alone in the rest area, shaking with relief and residual terror. The presence he'd felt for 3 days was gone. The weight of being followed had lifted. He climbed back into his cab and checked his mirrors. Nothing behind him. Nothing following. Just an empty rest area and the distant lights of Salt Lake City. He completed his delivery to Denver without incident, filed a vague report with his dispatcher about being followed but leaving out the supernatural elements. Took a week off to recover and process what had happened. And when he returned to driving, Gerald carried a new understanding with him. Death follows everyone eventually. Sometimes it gets impatient. Sometimes it manifests in strange ways, taking forms that don't quite fit the normal world. But it can't take you before your time unless you let it. Unless you give in to fear. Gerald had faced the manifestation and refused to yield, and that refusal had broken its power over him. He drives more carefully now, maintains his truck meticulously, doesn't take chances because he knows that while he won that particular confrontation, death will come again someday in some form. That's inevitable. But it won't be because he gave up, won't be because he let fear dictate his actions. Gerald Mitchell survived once by skill and luck, and he'll survive again and again until his genuine time comes. And if he ever sees a black Peterbilt with no plates in his mirrors again, he'll remember that he faced it before and won. That knowledge is armor against the fear, and fear, Gerald learned, is what the darkness feeds on. Deny it that meal and even death itself has to wait its turn. Story 7, The Cargo That Moved. Sandra Holloway had been hauling specialized cargo for 15 years, moving everything from medical equipment to hazardous chemicals with a perfect safety record. She'd transported materials that required specific temperatures, specific handling, specific security protocols. But in August of 2023, Sandra picked up a sealed container in Portland that she was forbidden from opening. And during the 3-day journey to Miami, she discovered that whatever was inside wasn't staying as still as it should be. The job came through a contractor Sandra had worked with before, a logistics company that specialized in sensitive shipments. The pay was exceptional, 4 times her normal rate for a cross-country run, and the requirements were straightforward. Pick up a 20-foot shipping container from a warehouse in Portland, transport it to a facility in Miami, maintain constant movement except for mandatory rest stops, and under no circumstances open or inspect the container. The cargo was listed simply as biological research materials, Class 4, temperature-controlled. Sandra had transported biological materials before. Usually it meant pharmaceuticals or laboratory samples, nothing particularly exciting or dangerous as long as you maintained the right temperature and didn't open the containers. She accepted the job and drove to the Portland warehouse to pick up the container. The warehouse was in an industrial area near the docks, a nondescript building with high security and no external markings. Sandra backed her trailer to the loading dock and waited while workers used a forklift to load the container. It was a standard shipping container, dark blue with no labels or markings except a series of alphanumeric codes stenciled on one side. The men loading it worked in silence, refusing to make eye contact with Sandra, and she noticed they wore heavy gloves despite the summer heat. Once the container was secured, a supervisor emerged from the warehouse with a clipboard. "You understand the conditions?" he asked Sandra. "Don't open it. Maintain temperature between 35 and 40 degrees. Keep moving except for mandatory stops. Deliver to Miami within 72 hours. "That's correct. Additionally, if you hear any sounds from the container, ignore them. The cargo may make noise during transport. This is normal. Do not investigate. Do not open the container under any circumstances. If you fail to comply with these instructions, the payment will be forfeit and you'll be in breach of contract. He stared at her intently. Is that clear? Sandra felt unease prickle along her spine. What kind of sounds? That's not your concern. Just ignore them and continue to your destination. Sign here. Sandra signed the paperwork, accepting responsibility for the cargo. As she climbed back into her cab, she glanced at the container in her side mirror. Just a blue box. Nothing special, nothing threatening. But the supervisor's warning about sounds echoed in her mind. What kind of biological research materials made noise? She pushed the thought away and started driving. Portland to Miami was roughly 3,000 miles, 3 solid days of driving with rest stops. Sandra planned to take Interstate 84 to 80, then cut south through Texas to pick up Interstate 10. Standard route. Good roads. She'd make the delivery with time to spare. The first day passed normally. Sandra drove through Oregon and into Idaho, the container sitting silent and motionless in the trailer behind her. The temperature gauge showed the refrigeration unit maintaining exactly 37 degrees. Everything was fine. At her mandatory rest stop that night, Sandra did her walk-around inspection, checking the trailer connections and the refrigeration unit. Everything looked good. She pressed her ear against the container's metal wall, listening. Nothing. Just silence. The second day, crossing Wyoming, Sandra started hearing things. At first, she dismissed it as road noise, the sound of her tires on pavement or wind buffeting the trailer. But gradually, she became certain that the sounds were coming from inside the container. Scratching, like something dragging against the metal walls. And occasionally a thump, something impacting the interior. Sandra checked the temperature gauge, still 37 degrees. The container was sealed. She could see that in her mirrors. Whatever was making the sounds was inside, and the supervisor had warned her this might happen. Biological research materials could mean animals, she supposed. Maybe laboratory mice or rabbits being transported to a new facility. That would explain the sounds. Nothing sinister. Just animals moving around in their cages. But the sounds got worse. By evening, Sandra was hearing what sounded like scraping. Metal on metal, as if something was trying to claw its way out of the container. And once distinctly, she heard what might have been a voice. Not words, just a vocalization. A groan or cry that was definitely not an animal. Sandra pulled over at a rest stop, her hands shaking. She sat in her cab listening to the sounds from the trailer. Scratch, 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 thump. A long, low moan. This wasn't laboratory animals. This was something else. Something human or something pretending to be human. She grabbed her phone and called the logistics company. Got voicemail. Left a message explaining what she was hearing and asking for clarification about the cargo. No response. She tried the supervisor's number, straight to voicemail. Sandra sat in the parking lot debating what to do. Opening the container would breach her contract, would mean forfeiting the payment, possibly facing legal action. But if there was someone inside, someone who needed help, she had a moral obligation to check. Except the supervisor had specifically warned her that she might hear sounds and should ignore them. He'd known this would happen, which meant either the sounds were normal and expected or he deliberately sent her off with a trailer full of something dangerous or illegal. Sandra made a decision. She would continue to Miami and make the delivery as contracted. But she would also document everything. She used her phone to record the sounds coming from the container, capturing the scratching and thumping and those disturbing vocalizations. If something illegal was happening, she'd have evidence. If it was innocent, the recordings would prove she'd fulfilled her contract despite the disturbing circumstances. She drove through the night, trying to ignore the sounds. They came and went in cycles. Periods of silence followed by bursts of frantic activity, scratch, scratch, thump, scratch. The vocalizations became more frequent, and Sandra could swear they sounded like words. Help! Please, let me out! But that was impossible. The container was sealed from the outside. Nobody could be trapped inside unless they'd been sealed in deliberately at the warehouse. And that would be kidnapping. Human trafficking. Sandra's stomach turned at the thought. By the third morning approaching Texas, the sounds had become almost constant. Whatever was in the container was desperate now, throwing itself against the walls with heavy impacts that Sandra could feel through the truck. The temperature gauge still read 37 degrees. The seals were intact, but the container was rocking slightly with each impact, and Sandra feared the cargo would break through. She stopped at a truck stop outside of Dallas and walked around to inspect the container. In daylight, she could see dents in the metal, fresh dents, bulging outward from inside. Whatever was in there was strong enough to deform steel. Sandra's blood ran cold. No laboratory animal could do that. No human either, unless they had tools or weapons. She called the police, explained that she was transporting a sealed container and believed there might be someone trapped inside. The officer who responded looked at her like she was crazy but agreed to investigate. He approached the container, knocked on it. Hello? Anyone in there? Silence. Complete and absolute silence. The scratching and thumping had stopped the moment Sandra called 911. The officer listened at the container walls. I don't hear anything. It was making noise for the past 36 hours, Sandra insisted. Scratching, banging, something moving around inside. The officer checked the seals. Containers. Locked. Says here it's biological research materials. You have the authorization to open it? No. My contract specifically forbids opening it. Then I can't help you, ma'am. If the container's sealed and you don't have permission to open it, I can't order it opened based on sounds you claim to have heard. Could be the cargo shifting during transport. Could be thermal expansion and contraction. Could be lots of things. You want it opened. You need to get authorization from whoever contracted you. The officer left. Sandra stood alone beside the container, feeling helpless. She knocked on the metal wall. If someone's in there, I'm trying to help. I swear I'm trying. No response. She climbed back in her truck and continued driving. Miami was still 1,500 miles away. 1,500 miles of listening to whatever was in that container. But the sounds didn't resume. The container fell silent, and Sandra wondered if whatever had been inside had died, or given up. Or perhaps it was waiting, conserving its energy for one final attempt to escape when the container was opened at the Miami facility. Sandra drove through Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast, making good time. The silence from the trailer was almost worse than the sounds had been. At least the sounds meant something was alive back there. The silence could mean anything. She reached Miami on the evening of the third day, exactly 72 hours after picking up the container in Portland. The delivery address was a facility in an industrial park south of the city, similar to the warehouse where she'd picked up the load. Sandra backed up to the loading dock and waited. Men in biohazard suits emerged from the building. Not standard protective gear, but full containment suits, the kind used for handling Ebola or other extremely dangerous pathogens. Sandra's unease crystallized into genuine fear. This wasn't pharmaceutical research. This was something far more dangerous. A supervisor approached her cab while the suited workers began disconnecting the container. Any problems during transport? Sandra hesitated. There were sounds from the container, scratching, banging, vocalizations. The The supervisor nodded as if this was expected. That's normal. The specimens become agitated during extended transport. Nothing to worry about. You maintain the temperature? Specimens? Sandra asked. What kind of specimens? That's classified. You fulfilled your contract excellently. The payment will be transferred within 24 hours. Thank you for your service. He handed her a document to sign, acknowledging delivery. Sandra watched as the container was lifted off her trailer and carried into the facility. Through the open loading dock door, she glimpsed the interior. A laboratory, gleaming steel and bright lights, technicians in biohazard suits, and on a monitor, security camera footage. An image of the container's interior showing what had been making those sounds. Sandra only saw it for a second before the door closed, but it was enough. Not laboratory animals, not human trafficking victims. Something else entirely. Something that moved wrong with too many joints in its limbs. Something with a face that was almost human but not quite. Something that had been watching her through the camera the entire journey. Aware of her presence just as she'd been aware of it. Sandra signed the paperwork with shaking hands and drove away. The payment arrived the next day as promised, along with a non-disclosure agreement requiring her signature. She signed it. What else could she do? Report that she'd transported something inhuman across the country. To whom? Who would believe her? She still drives trucks, still takes specialized cargo jobs. But Sandra refuses any contract that involves sealed containers, refuses jobs that prohibit inspection of cargo. And late at night, when she's driving empty highways, she sometimes hears scratching sounds even when her trailer's empty. Feels the phantom sensation of something heavy impacting metal. Hears vocalizations that might be words or might be something that learned to mimic words without understanding them. Sandra knows now that the highways carry more than just commercial freight. They carry secrets. Carry things that governments and corporations need moved from place to place but can never publicly acknowledge. And truckers like her are the unwitting accomplices transporting cargo that shouldn't exist to destinations that don't appear on maps. She wonders sometimes what happened to the specimens in that container. If they're still in that Miami facility or if they've been transported elsewhere. If there are other drivers carrying similar cargo, hearing similar sounds, and choosing to ignore them because the money's good and ignorance feels safer than knowledge. The roads connect everything, Sandra understands now. Connect places and people and things that should never be connected. And truckers are the threads that bind it all together, whether they want to be or not. Story 8. The Rest Stop at Mile 212. Thomas Brennan had been driving semi-trucks for 19 years, running routes across the Midwest and Great Plains with a flawless safety record and never a late delivery. He knew every rest stop between Minneapolis and Denver, every way station from Omaha to Billings, every truck-friendly parking area where a driver could grab a few hours of sleep without worrying about citations or theft. But in April of 2022, driving through South Dakota on Highway 14 with a load of farm equipment bound for Rapid City, Thomas stopped at a rest area that appeared on his GPS navigation system but shouldn't have existed according to any official state records. And the 6 hours he spent trapped in that impossible place convinced him that some locations exist completely outside the normal flow of time, catching travelers in loops that could last forever. The day started normally enough, with clear skies and light traffic. Thomas had picked up his load in Sioux Falls just after dawn, securing the agricultural equipment properly and checking his straps twice before departing. The route to Rapid City was straightforward, Highway 14 cutting west across South Dakota, a quiet two-lane road through endless farmland and rolling prairie. Thomas preferred these smaller highways to the interstate system. Less traffic meant fewer idiots weaving between lanes while texting. More scenery meant the drive felt less monotonous, and the pace was slower, more relaxed, giving him time to think and decompress from the stress of urban driving. By mid-afternoon, Thomas had been behind the wheel for 9 consecutive hours, approaching his mandatory break time. Federal regulations required drivers to rest after a certain number of hours, and Thomas was meticulous about following those rules. He'd seen too many truckers lose their licenses or worse from cutting corners on safety requirements. His GPS showed a rest area coming up at mile marker 212, just a few miles ahead. Thomas didn't specifically remember a rest area at that location from previous trips along Highway 14, but GPS systems were usually reliable and the database got updated regularly with new facilities. Mile marker 212 approached, and sure enough, a blue informational sign appeared indicating a rest area ahead with the standard symbols for parking, restrooms, and picnic facilities. Thomas activated his turn signal and took the exit, following a short gravel access road that curved away from the highway and into a grove of cottonwood trees. The rest area was small and dated, a parking lot with space for maybe 8 vehicles, a single-story cinder block building housing restrooms, and a covered picnic area with 4 concrete tables and attached benches. No other vehicles were present. The place looked reasonably maintained but old, like it had been constructed sometime in the 1970s and never updated or modernized. Thomas parked his truck in one of the designated spaces and performed his standard checks. Set the parking brake, turned off the engine, made sure his paperwork was secure. He glanced at his watch as he climbed down from the cab. 3:15 in the afternoon. He planned to take a 4-hour rest break, grab some sleep in the sleeper berth behind the driver's seat, then continue on to Rapid City refreshed and alert. He walked toward the cinder block building, noticing how quiet everything was. No highway noise, no bird sounds, no wind rustling the leaves. Just silence. The restroom building was open and functional. Inside, Thomas found ancient fixtures that confirmed his estimate of 1970s construction. Toilets with overhead tanks, sinks with separate hot and cold faucets, a hand dryer that looked original to the building with a metal case, and a design he hadn't seen in decades. Everything was clean, though, and everything worked. Thomas used the facilities, washed his hands in water that ran cold from both taps, and dried them under the vintage hand dryer that produced more noise than actual air movement. When he emerged from the building, Thomas stopped and stared at the sky. Something was wrong. When he'd pulled into the rest area 15 minutes ago, it had been mid-afternoon with bright sunshine and a clear blue sky. Now it looked like dusk. The light had that particular golden quality of late evening, with long shadows stretching across the parking lot and the sun sitting low on the horizon. Thomas looked at his watch again. Still 3:15 in the afternoon. The hands hadn't moved. He pulled out his phone. The digital display also read 3:15 p.m. Thomas walked to the center of the parking lot and stared up at the sun. It was definitely setting, painting the scattered clouds orange and purple. This was unmistakably sunset light, not mid-afternoon light. Yet every timepiece Thomas owned insisted that only minutes had passed. He checked the truck's dashboard clock. 3:15. His phone again. 3:15. His watch. 3:15. Time had stopped, but the day-night cycle continued. A sense of unease crept over Thomas. He walked to the picnic area, trying to make sense of what was happening. On one of the concrete tables, someone had left a newspaper. Thomas picked it up, expecting a recent edition. The masthead read, "The Sioux Falls Argus Leader," with a date of April 8, 1994. 28 years in the past. Thomas flipped through the pages. The news stories were all from 1994, detailed articles about the Rwandan genocide, reports on Kurt Cobain's recent death, analysis of President Clinton's healthcare reform efforts. The paper looked fresh, though, not yellowed or brittle like a 28-year-old newspaper should be. The pages were crisp, The ink wasn't faded, and it even still had that distinctive smell of newsprint. A sound made Thomas turn around. A car had pulled into the rest area while he'd been examining the newspaper. A 1980s-era Buick sedan, boxy and tan-colored, with simulated wood paneling on the sides. A family climbed out, parents in the front seats, two children in the back. They stretched and looked around, and the mother caught sight of Thomas standing by the picnic tables. She smiled pleasantly. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" Thomas stared at the family in disbelief. The father wore a members-only jacket in burgundy, the kind that had been popular in the 80s but Thomas hadn't seen anyone wear in decades. The mother had elaborately teased and sprayed hair in a style that had gone out of fashion before Thomas even started driving trucks. The children, a boy and a girl, both around 10 years old, wore clothes that looked like they'd come straight out of a Sears catalog from 1988. But they weren't costumes. These people looked completely natural and comfortable in their anachronistic clothing. "What year is this?" Thomas asked, his voice coming out hoarse. The mother's smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. 1988. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need help?" Thomas felt the ground seem to tilt beneath his feet. 1988. He'd been 9 years old in 1988, just a kid worried about 4th grade and baseball games, decades away from becoming a truck driver. "What month?" he managed to ask. June 3rd. "It's the first really nice day we've had this summer. We're driving out to visit my sister in Rapid City." The mother was looking at Thomas with growing worry now. "Sir, are you sure you're okay? Should we call someone?" Thomas backed away, shaking his head. "No, I'm fine. I'm sorry, I'm fine." He turned and hurried back to his truck, climbing into the cab and locking the doors. Through the windshield, he watched the family use the restrooms, let the children run around the picnic area for a few minutes, then pile back into their Buick and drive away. The car disappeared down the gravel access road toward Highway 14, and Thomas realized he hadn't heard any engine noise at all. The car had been completely silent, like watching a movie with the sound off. Thomas checked his watch again. Still 3:15 p.m. Checked his phone. Still 3:15 p.m. But the sun had fully set now while he'd been watching the family. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, bright points against the deepening blue. He tried calling his dispatcher, thumbing through his contacts and hitting the call button. No signal, not even one bar. The phone showed no service available. He tried the CB radio next, cycling through all 40 channels. Every single one produced nothing but thick, oppressive static. No voices, no chatter, no distant truckers discussing weather or speed traps. Just static. Another vehicle arrived as full darkness settled over the rest area. A pickup truck from the 1970s, a Ford with rust spots eating through the wheel wells and a cracked windshield. An old man climbed out slowly, wearing faded denim overalls and a green John Deere cap. He stretched his back with a grimace and nodded toward Thomas's truck. "Afternoon," he called out. Thomas rolled down his window. "What year is it?" he called back. The old man looked confused. 1974. What kind of question is that? What time is it? About 5:30 by the position of the sun. Clock in my truck quit working 6 months ago, so I go by the light. The old man squinted at Thomas's modern semi-truck with its sleek aerodynamic design and sophisticated paint job. "That's a new rig, real new. What company are you hauling for?" "Continental Express," Thomas said. "Never heard of them. You an independent contractor?" "No, company driver." The old man shook his head in a way that suggested he disapproved of something, but wasn't going to say what. He used the restroom, spent a few minutes stretching his legs, then climbed back into his truck and drove away. Like the Buick before it, the pickup made no sound at all. Thomas watched it disappear down the access road in complete silence. Over the next several hours, as Thomas sat in his locked truck trying to understand what was happening to him, more vehicles continued to arrive and depart. Each one was from a different time period. A 1960s Volkswagen van painted in psychedelic colors pulled in, and three young people with long hair and tie-dyed clothing climbed out, talking about driving to a festival in San Francisco. They used the restrooms, smoked something that wasn't tobacco, and drove away. A 1950s Chevrolet sedan arrived next, cherry red with elaborate chrome details. A salesman in a gray suit climbed out, made a phone call from a payphone Thomas hadn't noticed before, then departed. A 1940s Ford arrived with a farmer and his wife, both dressed in clothes that looked like they belonged in a Walker Evans photograph from the Depression era. All of them were real, all of them solid and three-dimensional. All of them interacted normally with the rest area, using the facilities, stretching their legs, eating packed lunches at the picnic tables. And all of them were from different years, different decades, different eras of American history. The only common element was Highway 14 in this rest area at mile marker 212. Thomas tried multiple times to leave. He started the truck, shifted into gear, and drove down the gravel access road toward the highway. The road curved gently through the cottonwood trees, and everything looked normal for about 100 yards. Then the road ahead seemed to blur and become indistinct. Thomas kept driving, but instead of reaching Highway 14, he found himself somehow approaching the rest area from the opposite direction. The road had looped back on itself in a way that violated every law of physics and geometry Thomas understood. He tried again with the same result. And again. No matter which direction he drove, no matter how fast or slow he went, the access road always curved back to the rest area. Thomas parked and tried walking instead, following the gravel road on foot. After about 100 yards, the same blurring occurred. The path ahead became indistinct and uncertain. When Thomas tried to push forward through the blur, he experienced a sensation like walking through thick molasses. And within seconds, he found himself walking back toward the rest area from behind. Some kind of invisible boundary existed at the edges of this place, a barrier that prevented anyone from leaving while allowing new arrivals to enter freely. Thomas returned to his truck and sat trying to think logically through his growing panic. He had entered this rest area at 3:15 p.m. on April 8, 2022. Now he was stuck in a location where time had stopped or fractured or somehow existed independently from the normal flow. Other people, or echoes of other people, or ghosts or time travelers, continued to arrive from various points in history. But they could all leave. Only Thomas remained trapped, unable to exit, unable to call for help, unable to do anything except watch the impossible parade of decades flowing through this single point in space. Hours passed, though Thomas's watch remained frozen at 3:15. The sky cycled through day and night multiple times, but not at the normal 24-hour pace. Sunrise and sunset seemed to chase each other rapidly, each complete cycle taking maybe 30 minutes. Thomas watched vehicles from different eras arrive and depart. Covered wagons pulled by horses from the 1800s, Model T Fords from the 1920s, muscle cars from the 1960s, modern vehicles from the 2000s and 2010s. Even vehicles he didn't recognize at all, with designs that seemed too advanced to exist yet, possibly from future decades that hadn't happened in Thomas's timeline. The rapid day-night cycling was disorienting and exhausting. Thomas tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard another vehicle arriving, and the need to understand what was happening kept him alert and watching. He documented everything on his phone, taking photos and videos, though he had no idea if the files would survive whatever was happening here, or if they'd be corrupted or deleted when he finally escaped. If he escaped. After what felt like dozens of day-night cycles, a familiar-looking truck pulled into the rest area. A semi-truck, same model and configuration as Thomas's own truck, with Continental Express logos on the door and trailer. Thomas practically fell out of his cab in his haste to reach the other driver. Finally, someone from his own time period, someone who might have answers or at least could confirm that Thomas wasn't completely losing his mind. An old man climbed down from the cab with visible difficulty, moving stiffly like someone with arthritis or old injuries. He looked at Thomas with immediate recognition and profound sadness. His face was deeply lined, weathered by decades of sun and wind and hard living. But something about his features was familiar. Very familiar. "You got stuck too," the old man said. His voice was rough and tired. Thomas stared at him. "Do I know you?" "I'm Thomas Brennan," the old man said quietly. "Same as you. I pulled into this rest area in April of 2022 trying to take a mandatory rest break during a run from Sioux Falls to Rapid City. Got trapped here just like you did. Spent what felt like months watching time flow around me but never through me. Seeing people from every era imaginable passing through while I remained stuck. Eventually I managed to escape, got back on the highway, completed my route to Rapid City. But when I looked in a mirror, I'd aged. This place had taken decades from my life in exchange for letting me go." Thomas looked at his own hands, still young and relatively unlined. "How do I get out? How do I escape without losing years of my life?" The old Thomas sighed deeply. "I don't know if you can. I think this place exists at the intersection of all times. A point where past and present and future touch and overlap. Most people pass through without noticing anything wrong. They arrive, use the restroom, leave, and never realize they briefly existed outside normal time. But some of us get caught at that intersection, become part of the place instead of just passing through. I came back here to warn you, to tell you what I learned, to maybe help you avoid my fate. What did you learn? That if you stay too long, you'll become part of the loop permanently. You'll be one of the echoes that other trapped travelers see. An appearance from 2022 arriving and departing forever while your real self, your conscious self, remains stuck outside time. You need to find the moment when the boundary is weakest and force your way through before that happens. When is it weakest? The old Thomas looked up at the rapidly cycling sky. Dawn. Real dawn, not these accelerated cycles you're seeing. When outside time and inside time briefly synchronize and align. That happens once every 7 days in this place, though only minutes pass in the real world outside. You'll feel it when it comes. A kind of loosening in the air, a subtle shift in how solid everything feels. That's your window. That's when you have to run. 7 days, I'll be here for 7 days. 7 cycles, it might feel longer. Time is strange here, but count carefully, and when the 7th dawn comes, be ready to move fast. The old Thomas turned back toward his truck. I have to go. I'm caught in my own loop now, coming back here every 7 days to warn my younger self, trying to break my own cycle by changing what happened. Maybe one of us will succeed eventually. The old man climbed laboriously back into his truck. Thomas watched as the vehicle pulled away, and as it reached the edge of the tree line, the truck began to fade. It became translucent, then transparent, then vanished entirely like it had never been there. Thomas stood alone in the parking lot, the weight of the old man's words settling over him like a physical burden. Thomas forced himself to stay alert and count the day-night cycles carefully. He marked each one by making a scratch on his truck's dashboard with his pocket knife. 1, 2, 3, 4. The cycles continued their rapid progression, and Thomas watched vehicle after vehicle arrive and depart. He saw a stagecoach from the 1860s. He saw a Tesla from what must have been the 2030s based on its design. He saw military convoys from various wars, civilian vehicles from every decade of automotive history. On the fifth cycle, Thomas tried to interact more with the travelers. He approached a man in a business suit from the 1990s and tried to explain that they were trapped outside normal time. The man looked at Thomas like he was insane and hurried back to his car. Thomas tried again with a woman driving a minivan from the 2000s. She called him a crazy person and threatened to call the police. None of them could perceive what was happening. To them, this was just a normal rest stop where they'd made a brief, unremarkable stop. By the sixth cycle, Thomas was exhausted beyond measure. He hadn't slept in what felt like weeks, though he knew objectively that much less time had probably passed. His eyes burned. His thoughts were fuzzy. He understood how the old version of himself had aged so much. This place wasn't just outside time. It was actively draining, pulling life and energy from anyone trapped within it. The seventh dawn began to break, and immediately Thomas felt the difference. The old version of himself had been right. There was a loosening, a sense that the walls of this prison were temporarily less solid. The boundary that had kept Thomas trapped felt thinner, more permeable. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and waited for the right moment. He could feel it building like static electricity before a lightning strike. When the sensation peaked, Thomas released the parking brake and drove. He pushed the accelerator to the floor, the truck surging forward down the gravel access road. The trees on either side were a blur. Ahead, the path began to shimmer and distort, the same blurring effect Thomas had encountered every previous time he'd tried to leave. But this time felt different. This time, the boundary resisted but didn't immediately loop him back. Thomas gripped the steering wheel and forced the truck forward through the resistance. It felt like driving through deep water, the truck's momentum fighting against something that wanted to push him back. Reality rippled around Thomas. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't tell which direction was forward and which was back, couldn't distinguish between the road and the sky, couldn't separate himself from the truck. Then, with an audible snap like a rubber band breaking, the resistance vanished. Thomas burst through the boundary and found himself on Highway 14, pulling back onto the westbound lanes from what looked like an abandoned and overgrown access road. He checked his mirrors. Behind him was an empty lot choked with weeds, no buildings, no picnic tables, no evidence that a rest area had ever existed there. His watch began ticking again. 3:20 p.m. 5 minutes had elapsed in the outside world. Thomas looked at his hands on the steering wheel, still young. He checked his face in the rearview mirror. No additional aging. He'd escaped without paying the price the old version of himself had paid. Thomas drove directly to Rapid City, delivered his agricultural equipment, and immediately requested a week off. He needed to process what had happened, needed to convince himself that he hadn't hallucinated the entire experience due to carbon monoxide poisoning or a stroke or some other medical emergency. But his truck's GPS history showed the stop at mile marker 212. His phone's camera roll contained dozens of photos of the rest area and the various anachronistic vehicles. And scratched into his dashboard were 7 marks counting the cycles he'd endured. Thomas never drove Highway 14 through that section of South Dakota again. He plotted alternative routes that added hours to his trips but avoided mile marker 212 entirely. And he never stopped at rest areas he didn't explicitly remember from previous trips. Because he understood now that some places exist outside the normal flow of time, existing simultaneously in all eras, and travelers who stop in those places might find themselves trapped in loops that span decades or centuries. The rest area at mile 212 might still be there in some sense, or might have been there, or might exist in all times at once. Thomas doesn't want to find out, Once was more than enough. He escaped where his older self hadn't, and he's determined never to risk that fate again. Story 9, The Mirror Highway. Catherine Walsh had been driving professionally for 14 years, hauling freight across the northern states. She knew the roads through Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota like she knew her own reflection. But in February of 2024, driving through a snowstorm in North Dakota, Catherine found herself on a highway that mirrored her every move, and the driver in the truck beside her was someone she recognized all too well. The snowstorm hit suddenly, whiteout conditions that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Catherine was on Highway 2 heading east from Williston toward Grand Forks with a load of oil field equipment. She should have stopped, should have waited out the storm at a truck stop. But she was behind schedule and the weather forecast had said the snow would pass quickly. So she kept driving, her speed reduced to 30 miles per hour, headlights barely penetrating the swirling white curtain ahead. The highway stretched straight across the prairie, and in good conditions Catherine could see for miles. Now she could barely see her own hood. She focused on the white line at the edge of the road, using it to maintain her position. The CB radio was filled with other truckers discussing the storm, debating whether to pull over or push through. Then Catherine noticed something strange. In the snow beside her, parallel to her truck, she could see lights. Another vehicle matching her speed exactly. At first she thought it was just a reflection, her own headlights bouncing off the snow in weird ways. But the lights were too distinct, too steady. Someone was driving directly beside her, maintaining perfect position. Catherine keyed her CB. "Eastbound traffic on Highway 2, anyone running parallel to me?" No response. Just static and distant chatter from truckers miles away. Catherine looked again at the lights beside her. They were definitely there. And as the snow shifted momentarily, she caught a glimpse of the vehicle. A semi-truck identical to hers. Same model, same company colors, same configuration. Like looking at herself in a mirror. Catherine slowed down. The other truck slowed down. She accelerated. So did her mirror. She changed lanes. The mirror truck changed lanes in perfect synchronization. Catherine felt fear creep up her spine. This wasn't another driver. This was something else. She tried the CB again. Anyone seeing double images in this storm? Anyone else experiencing weird reflections? Silence answered her. Catherine was alone on the highway, alone except for this impossible twin that matched her every move. The snow cleared briefly and Catherine got her first clear look at the other truck. It was driving on a road parallel to Highway 2, a ghost highway that ran beside the real one. And through the windshield of the mirror truck, Catherine could see the driver, a woman who looked exactly like her. Same face, same build, same dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. The mirror driver was staring back at Catherine with an expression of horror that probably matched Catherine's own. Catherine grabbed her phone to take a picture, but when she looked at the screen, the camera showed only empty prairie beside her. No parallel road, no mirror truck, just snow and darkness. But when she looked with her own eyes, the truck was still there, the mirror driver still staring. The CB crackled to life. Catherine's own voice emerged from the speaker, but she wasn't the one talking. "Can you hear me? Are you real?" Catherine grabbed her mic with shaking hands. "I'm real. I'm Catherine Walsh, driving for Northern Transit. Who are you?" "I'm Catherine Walsh," the voice said. "Driving for Northern Transit. This isn't possible. I'm hallucinating. The snow, the isolation, I'm seeing things." "I can see you," Catherine said. "You're in a truck identical to mine on a road parallel to Highway 2. What's happening?" "I don't know," the mirror Catherine replied. "I was driving through this storm and I saw you. You're on a road parallel to mine. I've been trying to get your attention, but I thought you were just a reflection or something my tired brain was creating. You're really there? I'm really here. Same as you. We're somehow driving on parallel roads, seeing each other through. Through what? Through some kind of dimensional boundary? The storm intensified again, and Catherine lost sight of the mirror truck. But the voice remained on the CB. I'm going to try something, Mirror Catherine said. I'm going to turn right at the next opportunity, see what happens. Catherine watched, through the snow. In the brief moments of visibility, she saw the mirror truck's turn signal activate. Then the truck began to turn, heading north off the parallel highway. Catherine's own truck jerked to the right. Her hands were gripped on the steering wheel, trying to keep straight, but the truck was turning of its own accord, following the mirror truck's movement. "Stop!" Catherine shouted into the CB. "When you turn, I turn. We're connected somehow." The mirror truck straightened out, and Catherine's truck stopped trying to turn. They continued east in perfect parallel. "Okay," Mirror Catherine said, her voice shaking. "Okay, we're linked. Whatever you do, I do. Whatever I do, you do. How do we break this?" Catherine didn't have an answer. She'd never experienced anything like this, never heard of any phenomenon that could create parallel realities or mirror dimensions. "Maybe we just keep driving," Catherine suggested. "Maybe when the storm passes, this will end." They drove in silence for what felt like hours. Catherine kept glancing at the mirror truck when visibility allowed, seeing her own face looking back at her with fear and confusion. The CB occasionally crackled with their breathing, proof that both were real, both were experiencing this impossibility. Then the mirror Catherine spoke again. "I have a theory. What if we're not in parallel dimensions? What if we're in the same space but displaced in time, like you're driving Highway 2 in February 2024, but I'm driving it in a different February, a different year. And the storm created some kind of overlap that lets us perceive each other." Catherine considered this. "What year are you in?" 2024, February 7th. "Same here, February 7th, 2024. Then maybe not time displacement, maybe. Maybe we're in parallel universes. Same date, same place, but different versions of reality. And somehow this storm created a thin spot where the universes touch." Catherine's scientific understanding was limited, but the explanation felt plausible, or at least as plausible as anything else in this situation. If that's true, how do we separate? How do we each return to our own reality? I don't know. Maybe we need to make a choice that differentiates us. Right now, we're doing the same thing, making the same choices. Maybe if one of us does something completely different, the connection will break. Catherine thought about this. "But we're linked. You saw what happened when you tried to turn. When you move, I move. We can't act independently. Then maybe we both have to choose to separate. Choose simultaneously to break the connection. Some kind of conscious decision that forces the universes apart." It sounded like mystical nonsense, but Catherine didn't have better ideas. "Okay. On the count of 3, we both visualize ourselves returning to our own reality. Our own separate highway. Agreed?" "Agreed," Mirror Catherine said. 1, 2, 3. Catherine closed her eyes briefly and imagined her highway solidifying, becoming the only highway. Imagined the mirror truck fading away, the parallel road disappearing. When she opened her eyes, the mirror truck was still there, still matching her speed. The attempt had failed. "Maybe we need to do something physical," Mirror Catherine suggested. "Like we both turn our wheels slightly left at the same moment. Force a physical divergence. What if that makes things worse? What if we crash? Do you have a better idea?" Catherine didn't. The snow was starting to thin, dawn light filtering through the clouds. Soon the storm would pass and other traffic would appear on the highway. What would happen then? Would other drivers see both trucks? Would the universes collide catastrophically? Okay, Catherine said. We turn left on 3, just slightly. Enough to break the pattern. Ready? Ready. 1, 2, 3. Catherine turned her wheel left, felt the truck respond, the tires gripping the snow-covered pavement. For a moment, nothing changed. The mirror truck turned in perfect synchronization. They were still linked, still moving as one. Then Catherine felt a wrenching sensation, like something inside her chest was being pulled in 2 directions. The mirror truck began to fade, becoming translucent. The parallel highway shimmered and dissolved. With a final snap, the connection broke. Catherine was alone on Highway 2, the dawn light revealing empty prairie on both sides. No parallel road, no mirror truck, just the normal world, solid and singular. Catherine grabbed the CB mic. Can you hear me? Are you still there? Static. No response. The mirror, Catherine, was gone, returned to her own universe or lost in the space between. Catherine would never know. She drove on to Grand Forks, delivered her cargo, and spent weeks trying to rationalize what had happened. Storm-induced hallucination, carbon monoxide exposure, exhaustion-driven delusion. But none of those explanations felt right. Catherine knew what she'd experienced was real. She'd met herself in a parallel universe, had driven beside her own reflection through a snowstorm that briefly connected 2 realities. Sometimes now, when Catherine drives through storms or fog or any condition that reduces visibility, she looks for that parallel road, looks for the mirror truck and the driver who shares her face. She never sees it again, but she knows it's out there somewhere on a highway that occupies the same space as her own, but exists in a different layer of reality. And maybe the mirror Catherine is looking too, wondering about that strange night when the universes touched and 2 drivers discovered they weren't as alone as they'd thought. The roads connect everything, Catherine understands now. Not just places, but possibilities. Not just destinations, but dimensions. And sometimes, when conditions are right and the barriers thin, you can glimpse the other paths you might have taken, the other lives you might have lived. The mirror highway showed Catherine a truth she'll carry forever. Reality is thinner than we believe, and the boundaries between what is and what might be are as fragile as snowflakes melting on warm pavement. Story 10. The Final Delivery. Michael Torres had been a trucker for 28 years, and in all that time he'd never missed a delivery. Rain, snow, mechanical problems, traffic jams. None of it had ever stopped him from completing his routes. But in December of 2023, Michael received a delivery assignment to an address that didn't exist, for a client who had died 7 years earlier. And the journey taught him that some debts follow us beyond death, and some deliveries must be made no matter the cost. The assignment came through the dispatch system on a cold December evening. Michael was parked at a truck stop outside of Nashville, planning his routes for the next week, when his phone buzzed with an urgent notification. Priority delivery. Immediate departure requested. Pickup location, a warehouse in Memphis. Delivery location, an address in New Orleans. Client, Marcus Torres. Michael stared at the screen. Marcus Torres was his father who had died 7 years ago of a heart attack, leaving Michael to inherit his truck and his routes. This had to be a clerical error, a glitch in the system that had pulled an old record. Michael called dispatch to clarify. "There's no error," the dispatcher said. "The job was filed today. Client specifically requested you as driver. Payment is prepaid. You need to pick up the cargo tonight and deliver it by tomorrow evening." "The client is my dead father. This doesn't make sense." The dispatcher paused. "The paperwork's all in order. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe it's an estate thing. Something his lawyer arranged. Just make the pickup and complete the delivery. If there's a problem at either end, you can refuse to complete the job. Michael drove to Memphis in confused silence. The warehouse address was in an industrial area he didn't recognize, a neighborhood that looked abandoned. Half the buildings were empty shells with broken windows. The warehouse itself was dark, but the bay door stood open, and inside Michael could see a single wooden crate illuminated by a bare bulb. He backed his truck to the dock and approached the crate cautiously. It was about 4 feet on each side, made of old wood with rope handles. Stenciled on the top in faded paint was M. Torres, Personal Effects, Handle with Care. Michael's hands shook as he loaded the crate into his trailer. It was lighter than he expected, maybe 50 pounds. He could hear things shifting inside as he moved it. A piece of paper was taped to the crate. Michael pulled it off and unfolded it. His father's handwriting, unmistakable even after 7 years. Michael, I'm sorry to do this to you, but there's something I never delivered. Something I picked up 30 years ago and could never bring myself to take to its destination. I carried it with me my whole career, and when I died, it ended up in storage. But it needs to be delivered. The debt needs to be paid. Please finish what I couldn't. The address is real even if it doesn't appear on any map. You'll know it when you see it. I love you. I'm proud of you. Dad. Michael sat in his truck reading the note over and over. His father had left him a final job, a delivery that had haunted him for 30 years. Michael didn't understand, but he knew he would complete it. This was his father's last request, his final route. He drove south through Mississippi, heading for New Orleans. The delivery address was in the French Quarter, on a street Michael didn't recognize, Rue des Ombres, Shadow Street. His GPS couldn't find it. Internet searches returned nothing. But the address was written clearly in his father's hand. 1847 Rue des Ombres, French Quarter, New Orleans. Michael reached New Orleans near midnight. He parked on the outskirts of the French Quarter and transferred the crate to a hand truck. The narrow streets wouldn't accommodate his semi. Then he started walking, searching for Rue des Ombres. The French Quarter was busy despite the late hour, tourists and locals filling the streets. Michael walked block after block, checking street signs. Bourbon Street, Royal Street, Chartres Street. All familiar, but no Rue des Ombres. He asked people if they knew the street. Most ignored him. A few looked at him strangely and hurried away. Finally, an old woman sitting on a stoop looked at Michael and the crate he was pulling. You looking for Rue des Ombres? Yes. Do you know where it is? Most people can't find it. But if you got a delivery to make, the street finds you. Keep walking toward the river. When you see a blue door with a crescent moon carved in it, turn left. The street's there. Michael thanked her and continued walking. Sure enough, after several more blocks, he found a blue door with a crescent moon. He turned left into an alley he would have sworn wasn't there a moment ago and emerged onto a narrow street lined with old buildings. A sign on the corner read, Rue des Ombres, in elegant script. The street was empty and silent. No tourists here, no music, no lights, just shuttered buildings and shadows. Michael checked the numbers. 1843, 1845, then 1847, a 3-story building with a wooden door and no windows. He knocked. The door opened immediately as if someone had been waiting. An old man stood in the doorway, dressed in clothes from another era. A suit from the 1920s, perfectly preserved. He looked at Michael and smiled sadly. You're Marcus's boy. I see the resemblance. He finally sent the delivery? My father died 7 years ago, Michael said. But he left instructions for me to complete this delivery. I know. I've been waiting. 30 years since he was supposed to bring it. But Marcus couldn't bring himself to complete the job. He was afraid. I don't blame him. This place frightens most people. The old man stepped aside. "Bring it in." Michael pulled the crate inside. The interior of the building was a single large room, empty except for a chair and a table. The old man closed the door and Michael heard a lock click. His heart raced, but the old man made no threatening moves. Just walked to the table and gestured for Michael to place the crate there. "Do you know what you've delivered?" the old man asked. "No. Personal effects, the label says. In a sense, this crate contains items your father picked up 30 years ago from an accident scene. A truck had crashed on Interstate 55, driver killed. Your father was first on the scene. While waiting for authorities, he found this crate in the wreckage and, well, he took it, thought it might contain something valuable, but when he opened it, he found something else." The old man pried open the crate's lid. Inside were objects that made no sense together: a child's shoe, a wedding ring, a bundle of letters, a straight razor, a pocket watch, a pressed flower. Random personal items with no apparent connection. "These belong to people I killed," the old man said quietly. "I was a murderer in life. These are trophies I took from my victims. When I died in that crash 30 years ago, I thought I'd escape justice. Thought death would free me from the guilt. But you can't escape what you've done. The items remained. They held my sins. And as long as they existed in the living world, I remained trapped, unable to move on, unable to face whatever judgment awaits." Michael backed toward the door. "You're a ghost." "More or less. A spirit trapped by its own crimes. Your father understood what this crate represented when he opened it. Understood that delivering it to me would mean facing a murderer, even a dead one. He kept it instead. Thought maybe if he never delivered it, I'd be trapped forever as punishment. But that's not how it works. We're all trapped together. Me here, unable to move on, and your father carrying the guilt of not completing his duty. He's dead. He doesn't feel anything anymore." "Are you sure? Do you know what waits after death? Your father believed in judgment, believed in facing your actions, and he knew that by keeping this crate he'd failed in his responsibility. That weighed on him. I could feel it. Our connection through these objects. His guilt feeding my imprisonment feeding his guilt. A cycle that could only break one way. By completing the delivery," Michael said. "Yes. By bringing the items back to me, now I can destroy them, release their hold, free myself to face whatever comes next. And free your father from the guilt he carried. You've done him a service, Michael. You've finished what he couldn't." The old man picked up the straight razor from the crate. "This was my favorite. The one I used most often. Holding it again brings back memories I've spent 30 years trying to forget." He placed it in a metal bowl on the table. One by one he added the other items: the shoe, the ring, the letters, the watch, the flower. When the bowl was full, he struck a match and set it all burning. The flames rose unnaturally high, burning with colors Michael had never seen. Blue and green and violet, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The old man stood watching as his trophies burned, tears running down his translucent face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry for what I did, for the lives I took, for the pain I caused. I'm sorry." The flames consumed everything, reducing the items to ash. As the last ember died, the old man began to fade. "Thank you," he said to Michael. "Tell your father, if you ever see him again, that I'm grateful, that his son finished what he started, that the debt is paid." The old man disappeared. The building shuddered and began to decay around Michael, walls crumbling, ceiling sagging. Michael ran for the door, yanked it open, and stumbled out onto Rue des Ombres. Behind him, the building collapsed into dust. When the dust settled, there was nothing there. Just an empty lot overgrown with weeds. Michael walked back to his truck in dazed silence. The quarter was still busy, people laughing and drinking, completely unaware that anything unusual had happened. He climbed into his cab and sat staring at the steering wheel. His phone buzzed, a notification from dispatch. Delivery confirmed. Payment processed. Job complete. Michael drove out of New Orleans and headed north. He didn't know if what the old man said was true, whether his father had really been trapped by guilt, whether completing the delivery had freed him. But Michael felt something lift from his chest, a weight he hadn't known he was carrying, gone now. A few days later, Michael had a dream. His father appeared to him looking young and healthy and at peace. "Thank you," Marcus Torres said. "I couldn't do it, was too afraid. But you finished it for me. I can rest now. I'm proud of you, Michael. You're a better man than I was." Michael woke with tears on his face. He didn't know if the dream was real or just his mind processing everything that had happened. But it didn't matter. He'd completed his father's final delivery, had paid a debt that stretched beyond death. And he understood now that the roads truckers travel aren't just physical paths. They're connections between past and present, living and dead, guilt and redemption. Michael still drives trucks, still makes deliveries across the country, but sometimes he gets assignments that don't quite make sense. Addresses that shouldn't exist. Clients who died years ago. And when those jobs come up, he accepts them without question. Because he knows now that some deliveries are about more than just moving cargo from one place to another. Some deliveries heal wounds, free trapped spirits, pay debts that span decades. The roads carry more than freight. They carry stories and secrets and unfinished business. And truckers like Michael are the ones who complete those final journeys, whether the destinations appear on any map or not.